All right. Good morning, John. Hope you had a good long weekend.
Sure
Like
did.
I,
Good morning, Alex.
morning. Like I said, we had a lot of questions come through before with the registration. So we'll start with those. Before that, I wanted to give you an opportunity to give you the floor. I know it's kind of a slow news week with the holiday and whatnot, but feel free to start us off with any reporting, any updates you have from around the city, and then we'll dive into some of the questions.
Well, the story I was working on last week was a story about Faneuil Hall and how the vacancies are growing quickly. A lot of people don't realize that Faneuil Hall is owned by the city. And so this is a big problem for City Hall if they don't figure out how to address the threats to small businesses. I see it as sort of a also an example of like what's happening in the retail and restaurant world in just it's in microcosm. uh, right now, about 20 of the 85 or so retail and restaurant spots are empty. Some will come back eventually, but many won't. And it's a real problem because tourism is down so much, and the office workers in downtown Boston that sort of fill in the gaps during the week haven't come back. Uh, they're talking about maybe the landlord. This Ashkenazi Acquisition Corp is the company that manages the property, essentially the holder of the long-term lease, and they have not given any free rent to any of the tenants. They've said you don't have to pay this year; you can pay next year. And this is obviously a problem not just for Ashkenazi and its tenants, but all over the place. A lot of small businesses are not paying rent right now, but there's going to be a big bill that comes due. And so, in the case of Faneuil Hall, they're talking about negotiating. The landlord pays $4 million a year in payments in lieu of taxes to the city, and right now they're negotiating with the Walsh administration. If they can get a way to reduce that and have those savings flow back to the small businesses, that might help them out somewhat. But that's kind of tricky because it's really Ashkenazi that'll benefit the most from that. So that's where things stand with it's for a lot of people, we kind of take in Boston, we take it for granted, but it would be a shame to see this major tourism traction wither away the way it has been if something isn't done.
No, definitely. And I think that reporting aligns with a lot of the questions that we had come in. So appreciate the update on that, John. We'll dive into some of the questions now. First question, we'll just run down the list. First question we had was about PPP forgiveness. I know that you and I were talking before we went live here in terms of some of the updates around the next stimulus bill and stuff like that. Are you hearing any updates from businesses around the city that are now requesting forgiveness from PPP? And just any, I guess, general updates around PPP that you might have would be helpful.
So the SBA cut off entrance into the Paycheck Protection Program about a month ago. I think most companies that were going to take advantage of it sort of rushed to take advantage of it early because they thought the money would run out. It really hasn't run out. In fact, there's probably more than $100 billion still in that fund. So we may see if Congress can ever get its act together, the House and the Senate and to some extent the Democrats and Republicans are sort of at wit's end with their own negotiating stances and don't seem to come to an agreement. But if they can get their act together, we should see some sort of extension of PPP. Maybe they'll put more money into it. Right now, if you're at least 60% of your expenses that you were reimbursed for through PPP, through this low interest loan, went to payroll, then you can get your loan forgiven. But there's a tricky thing here you have to talk to your accountant about, because if you seek forgiveness, then you may not be able to write off those expenses on your taxes. And for some companies, believe it or not, or many, it's actually not helpful for them to get the loan forgiven and then not get the tax benefit. I mean, it's a 1% loan, but it would seem like you could just get the grant and get it back, and that would be better. But a lot of businesses have built their finances around being able to write off these expenses. So we're going to have to wait. I think Congress may act on that. I know there are trade groups that are lobbying for that. Maybe IRS might offer new guidance. I would just say before you go ahead and pull the trigger and say, okay, I want my loan forgiven, I would talk to your accountant first about the tax consequences.
Definitely. It should be interesting as, things continue to reopen. Unfortunately, some businesses, as we've seen in the news as well, have gone under, especially in the restaurant industry. So it should be, thanks for the update with that, John. Next question we had, I'm sure some people heard about kind of the issue at Northeastern with those students that were kicked out, but we had a question about college instruction policies and how that might affect the housing industry in Boston, but also the broader economy. So John, give us kind of your thoughts on maybe the Northeastern situation and kind of the broader economic impact, as colleges continue to open up and kind of we see how it plays out as we are.
Well, obviously with Northeastern, it's interesting to see that the college is taking a hardline stance. And I guess for those of us who aren't afraid of paying for student tuition at colleges, but we happen to live near them, it's probably a relief because, right now, the return to college across the country is a major problem in terms of COVID and outbreaks. And here in Boston, there's an issue in University of New Hampshire where there's a pretty big frat party that I think there were maybe a dozen cases traced to. But in Boston, we haven't seen that yet. And I think it's because of the caution that the schools in this area are taking. And what you see, yes, there's definitely a hit to the housing industry. I mean, there are thousands of apartments that are on the market right now. At this time, this normally it's impossible to get an apartment in Boston at this time of year, and you can find them now. But at the same time, a lot of the colleges decide, well, we're going to bring people back and maybe leave it up to the professors to decide what should be remote and what should be in person, or maybe we'll have a mix and one freshmen and seniors will be in person in one semester, and then sophomores and juniors the other. They're trying to, because they have to justify to some extent their expensive costs, trying to recreate the college experience as much as possible, even if it means not setting foot into the actual classroom. And so they are filling rooms, and the spillover has been great for the hotel industry. I mean, the Northeastern KSU site, where Northeastern kids, it's not exactly a huge party, but it was a dozen people, that really should not have been doing in a room for, I think, two. I'm not sure about that, but it's certainly more than what was allowed by Northeastern rules. And but you're seeing the hotels have really picking up some of the slack, because as the dorms, you used to crowd kids into dorms as many as possible, and now you've got to spread them out. So a number of schools are contracting with hotels to take long-term occupancies in hotel rooms, and such as the W. Some of the hotels, it's some of the fancier hotels really do need the business. So it's an interesting experience. I know Emerson also has a number of kids at the W that we're starting to see. So that's sort of helping the hotels to some extent, although they're still struggling. It would have been a lot worse if all the colleges went 100% online, but at the same time, I think, for many schools, it's going to be hard to justify. I mean, Harvard everyone will pay, some people will pay for a Harvard degree, but I think for a lot of other schools, or say an MIT degree, you really have to provide something for that money aside from online classes. So there's some help to the local economy, but it's still nothing like it is normally at this time of year.
Definitely. And in terms of the news, I mean, it should be interesting to see, as you mentioned, with all the universities and colleges in the Boston area, are there lessons learned from, on the student side and also the university side in terms of how these situations are handled? I mean, I have to assume it's not going to be the last time something like that happens. So it should be interesting just to see also the backlash, from people voicing their opinions on social media and such about, especially, the college not refunding the money. There's just a lot of conversation about it. So it should be interesting to see as it plays out.
Yeah, I think Certainly, I would be livid if I was one of those parents, but at the same time, I'm sure that they signed a document saying, we're not going to gather in groups, and that the Northeastern wouldn't be doing this unless it had sort of a legal backing for it. So yeah, it will be interesting to watch.
Definitely. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. This question, you and I don't think knew much about, but the question about the My Local campaign. First, do you know anything about the My Local campaign that you can kind of explain for those who don't know? And then the actual question that we received was, do you think the new My Local campaign will help the state?
Yeah, so the My Local campaign it was started right before the sales tax holiday by the Baker administration. It's $2 million to spend on marketing, encouraging people to stay local with their money. And I think it's a great idea in that right now tourism it's tough to do tourism marketing and to strike the right balance. You don't want people coming from hither and yon, but at the same time, you do want people to come in and spend some money at the local restaurants and local businesses. So by focusing the campaign on people who are in Massachusetts, it makes sense. I'd say it's off to a slow start. I tried the website yesterday and I couldn't log on. I don't know if they're still building the website. I know they sort of rushed to get it out before the sales tax holiday. I haven't seen any sign of advertising. I honestly think it hasn't really started yet. What I would say is the governor did get some positive press coverage prior to, he held a press conference at Wheelworks, it's a bike shop in Belmont, to announce this campaign about 2 weeks ago. And, it was, as any press conference that the governor gives, received some media attention. So I guess they probably thought it made sense to start the campaign and just get as much free media attention as they could, even while they still don't have the campaign really going. What kind of difference it'll make, I don't know. I mean, the businesses need all the help they can get. We normally spend about $10 million a year on tourism marketing in Massachusetts, and that might sound like a big number, but it's actually pretty small compared to many other states. So this is a substantive increase in that. But without seeing the campaign literature or knowing about the strategy, it's hard to know how much of an impact that'll have. I mean, it's sort of still, even though they've supposedly launched it, I would say it's still in the formation stage.
Gotcha. So the next question we had, this comes on the heels of also more news I saw just in the past week or so, especially Boylston Street has been hit hard with some restaurants and bars closing. But this question is, what do you believe might be the silver lining for restaurants during the crisis?
It's really hard. I mean, we're depending on who you talk to, at least 1 out of 5 businesses won't survive the pandemic or won't reopen, maybe more. It's pretty dire for an industry to have this kind of, I think I talked about it with one chef and we described it as an extinction level event. They're doing anything they can to survive. But what I would say is what the legislature in Massachusetts is paying close attention to this issue because everyone has favorite restaurants. They have restaurants in their district. They have restaurants in their communities. And these restaurants are lobbying heavily for help, and they're very sympathetic because of the onerous restrictions. Many people still are not eager to eat inside, and so a lot of restaurants, of course, were able to offer outdoor dining first, and so many of it is for the first time. What I would say is there are 2 things that we're seeing at the legislature that could have sort of long-term implications that would be beneficial for the restaurant industry. One is sort of this framework for easily allowing outdoor dining. Massachusetts rules are anything involving alcohol tends to be pretty tricky, and the legislature is looking at sort of streamlining that process for the long term. I think that would be a positive. I think we are going to see, once we get out of the pandemic, we're going to see a lot more outdoor dining. It's going to be a bigger part of a selling point for restaurants than in the past. The other thing is interesting is right now the legislature is considering caps on delivery fees from companies such as Uber Eats, Grubhub, DoorDash. I mean, Postmates, they are, they can be really excessive. Restaurants say it kind of kills their profit when, they don't have their own delivery system, so they rely on these third-party vendors, and the fees can be, total up to 30% or more of the bill. And that, of course, doesn't leave much left for the restaurant. So we may see caps long-term. They want to cap them at 15%. And if that does come to pass, that would certainly be a benefit for the restaurants, which are really, they're the ones that use these delivery companies are really getting squeezed by them.
For sure. We actually had two questions come through the Q&A box that relate to this, so we can tie those in now. Also use this as a reminder. If you tuned in late, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, so feel free to add any questions there. We had two questions, John, about kind of the seasonality of outdoor dining. Obviously, fall coming now, getting a little bit cooler as the months pass. Both these questions kind of tie into restaurants kind of extending the outdoor dining period, even with the weather. So the first question we had was, are you hearing anything about restaurants extending their outdoor dining season beyond the end of October? And then we had another question kind of tying into that. Any early thoughts on how restaurants will do once the weather begins to change? So do you anticipate this leading to more restaurants kind of going out of business kind of once the seasons turn over? So figure those are two good questions that tie into kind of this.
Yeah. And I what I would say is that I have not heard of many restaurants going beyond October. That is actually, I do think many of them will go through the end of October, which is a little later than restaurants typically offer it. But I think they're going to go as long as they can. You've got most notably in Moody Street in Waltham shut down. A whole stretch of the main drag is shut down to accommodate the restaurants there because the street is so dense with restaurants. That's supposed to last until beginning of November. But it's a valid question, and I think that's one of the reasons why the legislature feels the pressure to act to help the restaurants, because inevitably revenue is going to drop. I think, generally speaking, my gut sense is that people over time will feel a little more comfortable with going to restaurants as long as there isn't a huge surge in COVID numbers here. But there'll still be plenty of people that'll, until there's a vaccine, will not feel comfortable spending an hour with their mask off, eating indoors with strangers around. And that's a real problem for the restaurants. And I don't know how you get around that. I think you're going to find restaurants, investing in those torches that can kind of warm their, decks and the makeshift spots on parking lots. Maybe we can get it all the way to December. I think obviously once the snow starts, it's going to be challenging. Most of these restaurants that have outdoor dining have not invested in tents because they're very expensive. I think tents could keep you going for quite some time. So maybe more will think about that in the future because of the weather issues.
Definitely. We have another question relating to fall that just came in. This one about the real estate market. Any thoughts on the condo market in Boston in the short term, this fall, this winter, and kind of impact on the pricing with kind of, what's happened through the pandemic?
Yeah, one of the, we might get to this question. It's a pretty broad question, but it hinted at in the questions that were submitted in advance. So what I would say is, broadly speaking, the condo market in Boston is softened. And I think that there are some people that just do not feel comfortable taking an elevator with strangers anymore. And the luxury condos in Boston are almost all accessible via elevator. At least the condo towers are. So that's obviously going to soften the market a bit. Much of the high-end market also is reliant on overseas buyers, and I think that is more challenging during the pandemic. So I do think we're going to see a soft fall for condos, but in general, real estate is strong. People, especially single families and in the suburbs, I think people are making the decision. Okay, yeah, it's been great living in the city, but I think it's time. Maybe they were going to wait 2 years before they move out to the suburbs. They're doing it now. They're still tough to get. I live in Newton, and I mean the prices here are through the roof. The interesting side note, perhaps not surprisingly, is that both the Berkshires and Cape Cod are seeing increases in home prices. Because of the fact that so many people have long-term work from home strategies in place with their employers. Until the pandemic's over and we can get at this if we have a chance, I do think there's going to be more work from home once the pandemic is over. So that has benefited, people that want the communities that are sort of vacation places where people would love to settle down, but they're too far away from the employment centers, such as the Cape and the Berkshires. I think those areas have also seen benefit.
Definitely. We'll try to squeeze in as many of these questions as we can. We had another question come in about trends in the retail industry. What trends do you foresee kind of moving forward through the end of the year and beyond for retail in Boston?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of bums me out to think about because I happen to like to shop in person, but I think I think stores are going to be smaller. I think stores are going to, you're going to have some because of occupancy limits. Stores are going to find themselves struggling to make. You may wind up waiting to get into a store. But the people ahead of you, maybe they have a limit of 3 people in the store, and maybe they don't buy anything, or maybe they spend $100. But because of that, it really slows down the turnover that you need to make a store sustainable. I do think we've already seen stores invest in curbside pickup. They've never done this before. And many stores have gone online that didn't exist. They hadn't done that before. I think everyone's going to have an online / mobile strategy of some sort to survive. And but long term, I think we're still going to see more closures as long as this pandemic keeps limits in stores and has people nervous about having too many people congregated in one place indoors. The other interesting trend to watch, I think when this all first started, everyone was worried that cash could carry the coronavirus. I think we now know that it's probably not the case, that it's more comes from the air than from touch. But I do think that you're seeing an acceleration of digital payment systems and contactless payment systems. And I think that's going to continue as well. We're just going to see more and more places that adopt those and maybe adopt those exclusively. I think in Massachusetts, there's still rules about having to honor cash, but I do think you're going to see a lot more of those at the cash register.
Definitely. Agreed. We had a couple more questions come in. The Q&A box. One question was sparked from you mentioning the Cape and the Berkshires and people working from home. This person wants to know, what are ways for businesses and organizations to be more productive in the virtual era? Anything you've heard from talking to business owners in the area, anything like that, any suggestions?
It's a challenge. I mean, if you take just remove having kids who are having to learn remote from the equation, I mean, that is a challenge that, I would say that if businesses have the money, helping subsidize tutoring, that sort of thing would be helpful to deal with that issue. I think that businesses are going to, I guess I'm less concerned about the productivity because for me, I'm more productive in the office, but if you kind of even out that, I don't have to do the commute, I probably get as much same amount done in a given day. But it's more about retaining the corporate culture as more and more new employees. I think that's what I'm hearing is the biggest challenge, that CEOs are saying, we're hiring people that I've never met before, and they've never met their coworkers. And how do you overcome that? I think you're going to start to see more, in-person meetings, and if just in a socially distanced way or they're outdoors, just to kind of get people familiar with their new colleagues. I don't think the Zoom meetings quite, it's still a little artificial, and I don't think it quite conveys it the same way of, that, how do you say it? There's a certain way familiarity you get from being next to someone in person versus meeting them online. And so companies have to be creative about overcoming that, because it's going to become more of an issue the longer this pandemic drags on.
Definitely. We had another question come in relating to work at home. Once again, this person's seen a suggestion about converting office space, since there's an excess of office space with obviously a lot of companies working from home, and converting some of those to affordable apartments. And they were wondering kind of what's your opinion on this?
I think it's a great idea. I am, we are seeing this seismic shift. I mean, there's almost an unprecedented amount of sublease space on the market right now. So most office tenants are obviously in long-term leases, and so they're not going to drop their leases. But I've heard of several businesses that when their lease came up, they did not renew a lease, and they're all working remotely. So the amount of space that's empty in downtown Boston is going to keep creeping upwards. The buildings, office buildings, don't easily convert to residential, but I do think that some property owners are going to have to think long and hard. It's not like you can go about making that shift. You can't go from kind of one from the other and back. It's a very expensive retrofit, but I think you might find properties that are near transit might find themselves more in demand for residents, for apartments, even though, still right now, many people don't feel comfortable taking the T. I do think that that's still a better spot. Or you could say right near highway, maybe, right off the highway, an office building that's barely getting used might get converted. So I guess you'd say I'm in favor of giving it a shot. I don't think it's a simple conversion. I think it's going to be slow. I think we'll see some examples, but I think there'll be outliers.
Definitely. That's about our time, John. Just wanted to leave kind of a minute or two for any closing thoughts you might have. News you're looking forward to this week, getting back into the office. The floor is yours for the last minute or two.
Well, thanks, Alex. Yeah, I guess I'd say this. We still had a number of questions that we couldn't get to. So if anyone wants to shoot me an email with the question they have, I'd be happy to try to answer them to the best of my ability. My email is john.chesto@globe.com. That's John without an H. jon.chesto@globe.com. I am interested to see if Congress can, now they're coming back from a recess, they can figure this out. If they can, there's a lot riding on the stimulus bill. I would say what we should be most concerned about is some sort of aid for states and cities. The Democrats really want this to happen. And my familiarity with the state budget is here, we kind of need it to happen. I think a number of states do need some assistance from the federal government to kind of smooth over a lot of the shortfalls that have been caused by COVID. So that's one thing we're going to be watching this week. Also on Friday, the Governor Charlie Baker's restrictions on businesses reopening, his authority to do so is being challenged at the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts. So that'll be interesting to watch as well. They're having that case goes to a hearing on Friday.
Interesting. We'll have to keep an eye on it. We had a lot of first-time viewers this week, which was exciting. So appreciate it if it was your first time. We do this every 2 weeks, so hopefully we'll see you next Tuesday. John, always a pleasure. Appreciate the knowledge. And
thanks everybody for tuning in.
We'll see everybody in 2 weeks. Thanks a lot. Have a good week.